Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Ashley Tellis, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C., perhaps America's best-known strategist on South Asia, definitely on India, perhaps one of India's best-known strategists. Ashley, welcome to The Print.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. It's a pleasure to be back.
So you're in Washington, D.C., and I'm in Delhi. So, you know, it's night here and you're in the day. It's daytime where you are. But these last few weeks have been very, very busy and momentous in a sense for India, for India's foreign policy. We've had the disengagement with China in Ladakh after 8 or 9 months. Well, the troops are still sort of coming down those icy heights. And we've had a re-engagement with Pakistan. What do you make of both these big events?
Well, I think it's certainly welcome news on both fronts. As you mentioned, the last few months have been extremely difficult for India. Between the pandemic, the economic slowdown, and then the crisis on the border, there hasn't been much good news. So I suspect the Indian leadership is actually welcoming this breather that has materialized. So at least from the viewpoint here in Washington, this is good news.
So what's the viewpoint in Washington?
I think the viewpoint in Washington is that the administration has welcomed these developments. Mm-hmm. Everyone is still very cautious, though, about how things will evolve because this is...
You talk about China or you talk about Pakistan?
On both fronts.
Okay.
On both fronts. This is really the beginning of a very long process. And I think while there is a lot of consolation to be derived, that both parties, or all three parties at this point, are actually making the effort, this is by no means the end of the road. So I think there is a cautious and watchful sort of mood.
So in some ways, of course, India, China, and Pakistan are linked. The story is linked. But let's take this one by one. When you see the India-China imbroglio, the face-off over the last 9 months, do you know why the Chinese aggressed across the line of actual control in the first place in April last year?
Well, I think this is going to be a matter of speculation for a long time to come. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we have enough evidence to, make the argument conclusively. But the fact that they did certainly represented a dramatic change.
Why do you think, even if it's not a conclusive argument, why do you think they did it?
Well, I think they certainly wanted to establish their claim lines and to organize, sort of assert control over the extent of claim lines. Mm-hmm. My own view has been that this has to be seen in the context of developments that occurred in India in August of 2019. And particularly the rebuffing of the Chinese effort, to raise the issues relating to Jammu and Kashmir in the United Nations and elsewhere. Okay. So there was definitely a political backdrop to these developments. But in any event, the fact that they engaged in such aggression, which was blatant, could not be justified by any measure or by any sort of criterion.
But were you surprised? Because China is this, it's not just a rising power, it's risen. And Xi Jinping, the dear leader, he's president for life. Why would he do something like this? What did he expect? The Indians to roll over and say, okay, come into our country?
No, I think he expected exactly that. If you look at the record of Chinese behavior in the last few years, they have engaged in successive salami slicing. And they have not faced pushback. So it was not unreasonable for them to imagine that they could occupy, pieces of territory which are not exactly populated, which, don't have a manned armed presence 24/7 and get away with it. And I think India surprised them, first by resisting, and two, even after it was faced with the fact of occupation, refusing to capitulate. And I think both those developments really paid off very handsomely because they forced China then to face up to the fact that India was not going to be a pushover. And I think what you're seeing now in terms of the disengagement are really the first fruits of India's very determined resistance, to hold the line in the face of this Chinese misbehavior.
So there's been a lot of debate here at home about the disengagement. Some people have said that the Indian troops should not have come down the Kailash range because that's the only real card that you have. But what do you think about that?
Well, I think this was inevitable in some sense. If you wanted to get back to some process of dialogue and normalization, both sides would have to go back, to the status quo ante as it existed in April of 2019. So from that point of view, it's not surprising to me that India would also pull back. Now the questions are, whether this disengagement which occurred in Pangong will be extended to the other areas.
Right.
Including the very tricky, question of creeping Chinese occupation in the Depsang Plains.
Yeah.
So only time will tell. Only time will tell. But I think this was actually a good move, all said and done.
So the Chinese withdrawing their tanks and their armor, the heavy armor from their side of the LAC on the eve of the Spring Festival, within 24 hours of the announcement being made. I mean, that was almost unseemly. It was almost like they were really in a hurry to get down.
Well, they might have been in a hurry to get down. This is extremely hostile terrain, and the Chinese have never maintained a presence in such strength, particularly in the winters. And so I have no doubt that they definitely wanted to get away from it to the degree they can. It only shows, though, that they do have the capacity to move back and forth as they please. And that means India will have to be, very careful and guarded with respect to monitoring their movements in the future.
So, Ashley, what do you make of, you talk about the troops wanting to get down, but what do you make of the fact that last year in June, there was in the Galwan Plateau, as you know, that 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives. What is your information or analysis about Chinese soldiers? Now we believe that 4 or 5 Chinese soldiers were killed. But what's your assessment?
Well, I think it was certainly unplanned. It was a local provocation that got out of control. But the fact that it got out of control, I think, signaled that something has changed in very unsettling ways in the broader Sino-Indian relationship. That China was prepared to risk the use of force, the loss of life, in order to occupy what at the end of the day are really marginal territories. Mm-hmm. And the fact that a rising China is willing to do that, I think should really, give everyone pause. In some ways, this is consistent with what China is doing elsewhere, for example, in Southeast Asia. But I think in many other ways, it was aimed very deliberately at India because they wanted to push India. They wanted to put India in its place. And they really wanted to sort of show their position, in the regional pecking order, which is number one.
Why would they want to do that? India is another Asian country. We may not be as big and powerful as the Chinese. We are 1/5 their economy. But why would you want to do that to a fellow Asian power?
I don't think they quite see it that way. I think they see themselves as the center of Asia. They want India to accept Chinese preeminence in Asia. And India has, consistently refused to do that. And so I think they use the opportunities, of the last year to try and make that point. And I think India's response has certainly frustrated that Chinese ambition. And I think that is all to the good.
So Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a sense, led from the front. I mean, obviously, it's all been very much behind the scenes. We only have External Affairs Minister Jaishankar talking to his counterpart Wang Yi. There was a conversation last week, but also in Moscow, as you know, in September, that the meeting did take place. But tell me, when the Trump administration was in power for a large part of this aggression, and now the Joe Biden people are in power in DC, in the US. So how do the Americans look at this? How does the Biden administration look at this whole thing?
I think there is a fundamental continuity in US policy here. the Trump administration, came out very vigorously in support of India, and in ways that were sort of unexpected, given Trump's disinterest in the world, as it were. The Biden administration has essentially continued the policy. They have supported India in this confrontation with China, and they have indicated that they see India as the aggrieved party, that it's really the victim. And therefore, I expect that the US will continue to support India, including.
Said very much publicly. I mean, there have been 2 telephone calls between the Prime Minister and President Biden, but there hasn't been very much publicly from the Americans.
Well, there's no need now. Remember, even the Trump administration's public statements occurred at a time when there was an overt confrontation. There is no overt confrontation right now. Things have sort of settled into a cul-de-sac, and there is no reason for the US to say anything more than it has already done. The important point is that in the private conversations, there has been no doubt that we have communicated our support for India.
In what way? I mean, what do you think would have been said?
Well, we basically conveyed that we will support India in the face of this Chinese aggression. And whatever else is required will be negotiated between the 2 governments, when the moment requires it. But I don't think there should be any doubt in New Delhi about where the US stands on this question.
But how would you support India? In what way?
I mean, we've already provided India with defense equipment on very short notice.
To fight in Ladakh?
Absolutely. We have provided India with all kinds of intelligence support. And I expect that that will continue to be the norm well into the future.
But so you're saying, shorn of the public statements, you don't think that the Biden administration wants to get involved in speaking out publicly, and that they would rather do it behind the scenes?
No, I don't think there's need at the moment for anything that has gone beyond what has already been done.
So there is some concern here, perhaps at least in the in elite Delhi, that the Biden administration will make its peace with China. That you have too much happening at home. You're a divided nation for more than one reason. COVID, you still haven't got a grip on COVID, and that you will make your peace with China, and that means that India also should or better make its peace with China.
I think that is a completely premature conclusion. If you look at the record so far, and the Biden administration has been in office now for, barely a month or barely 2 months, they have continued the fundamentals of the policy vis-a-vis China. They have taken a very tough line on Chinese misbehavior globally. The president has declined to withdraw the tariffs. He has declined to give the Chinese any sense that there is a quick return to the old US-China relationship that existed before Trump. I think the Biden administration is very sensitive to the fact that a lot has happened in the last 4 years. And Chinese behavior has not exactly been conducive to stability. And so even though there are these fears in Delhi, I think these fears are overwrought because the US recognizes the changes in the international environment that have taken place.
So what has been the conversation between India and the US on China these past several months?
Well, I mean, I don't have anything to say beyond what was in the public statements. But the public statements issued by both sides really speak for themselves. That we see India as a fellow democracy. We see India as a victim of Chinese aggressiveness. And we see India as a geopolitical partner, both in the context of the bilateral relationship and in the context of the Quad. And I think all these realities are here to stay. And that should be a very reassuring message for Delhi.
Now, Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi had a very close tie. And you remember the Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar. And then when President Trump comes to India, he sort of greeted with this very, very red carpet welcome. Do you think that Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi will have a similar affinity, if you like? How do the Americans look at Prime Minister Modi?
I think they will have a similar relationship because at the end of the day, even though this is clearly a relationship between two individuals, it's also a relationship between two countries. Uh, and I think whatever Prime Minister Modi did was dictated by the national interest on every occasion, whether it
Trump,
was with President Obama. Yes, whether it was, no, Prime Minister Modi's engagement with President Obama first and then later with President Trump was dictated by the requirements of India's national interests. And I expect that he will engage in the same outreach with President Biden. Now, unfortunately, the circumstances are such that, the two leaders can't meet physically, at least not in the immediate future. But when that changes, I think you will see the same degree of enthusiasm on both sides, because these things are not driven by personal relationships alone, although those personal relationships are critical, but ultimately by the interests of the two countries. And the interests of the two countries really converge in ways that I think are truly substantial and enduring.
So how do you see, how do the Americans see Prime Minister Modi? Is he the leader that stood up to China?
I think that is certainly the way we should see it. To my mind, the way India has handled the crisis is really an object lesson for the rest of the world. And there are three elements that I think we need to pay attention to. First is, even when you suffer a reverse, don't capitulate. Two, continue to engage in a dialogue. Keep all lines open, with your adversaries. And three, inflict pain as appropriate. And I think India has begun to do that in the economic sphere. It also did that operationally on the ground in the military sphere. And there was the threat of much more pain to come, right? I mean, inherent in the Indian strategy was that everything that was done was a precursor to the threat of further pain. And I think that collectively paid off.
But now India is opening up its economy to the Chinese and inviting Chinese investment. In fact, about 45 proposals have been cleared or are in the pipeline for being cleared.
Well, but that should not be surprising. I mean, no one can isolate China in a hermetic sense, which is have no relationship with it whatsoever. China is a very important player in the global economy, and every country in the world will have relations with China. The question is to have those relations in ways that are first appropriate and that serve the country's self-interest. The United States will go back to having some semblance of a productive relationship with China, but that relationship will be directed in ways that advance our interest. And I think India will do just the same.
So India needn't be concerned by a revived or a revivified relationship between the US and China?
Not at all. And neither should we be concerned if Sino-Indian economic relations, for example, develop. I mean, a positive sum game is in everyone's interest.
Right.
The question is that the Chinese have positioned themselves with an eye to taking advantage of their opposite of their partners. And that, of course, is completely undesirable. And I think India has shown the way in which, some of these challenges can be managed.
So let me ask you a question about the Quad, and then we'll move to Pakistan. Do you feel that India is being far more circumspect about its participation in the Quad than it should be?
Not anymore. I think there were early hesitations that India had about the Quad, but the crisis with China has certainly changed India's attitude. Some things will remain constant, though. So, for example, I do not see India ever endorsing the Quad as a military alliance for confrontation with China. But I do see India increasingly using the Quad as a diplomatic forum in which, the democratic states in Asia can coordinate their policies vis-a-vis China. So to that degree, there will be both continuity and some change, in India's policy.
Are you upset, or are you concerned, perhaps that's a better word, that India is reaching out to the Russians once again, not just on the S-400, but that Prime Minister Modi and the Russian President Putin are planning, they have conversations, and that when COVID gets better, that there will be a meeting of sorts?
Well, it doesn't bother me personally because, I'm aware of India's long-standing ties with Russia.
But there is
Uh,
concern in DC.
I think there is some concern in DC because we see Russia in a very different way from the way Delhi sees Russia. Delhi sees Russia as a steadfast friend, going back to developments in the early 50s.
Right.
The US, particularly under Putin, has had a much more difficult relationship with Russia. So this is going to be an issue that we have to manage in the bilateral relationship.
Can I bring you to Pakistan now? And how do you see the re-engagement? There has been a back-channel conversation between the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and his Pakistani counterpart. How do you see this?
Well, I think it's certainly a welcome development in the sense that it indicates that both sides are looking to build some form of normalcy in what has been a very difficult relationship. I read this, though, as primarily a Pakistani initiative. That is, the Pakistani army took the lead in reaching out to Delhi in order to sort of restore some semblance of equilibrium. And to my mind, that is a function both of the stress that the Pakistani state is experiencing at home and an effort to rehabilitate what is Pakistan's tattered relationship internationally. But whatever the reasons, the fact that the army has actually engaged in this overture, I think, is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Now, what is unclear to me is what is the end game? What are they seeking to do, with this effort? Is this meant to be simply an effort at temporizing to sort of put time on the clock? Or are they genuinely looking to turn the corner in terms of a new relationship with India? And I think on that fundamental question, the jury is still out.
So are you surprised that it was General Bajwa, the Pakistani army chief, who made these overtures rather than the Prime Minister Imran Khan? Because in the past, even though the Pakistani army is all powerful, very powerful, but in the past you have had Prime Ministers like Nawaz Sharif who have had independent relationships with Indian Prime Ministers, namely Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
I think it's unfortunate but true that Prime Minister Imran Khan just does not have the credibility. I mean, if he had...
Not even in DC?
I don't think so. I mean, there is a very clear view that the only center of power in Pakistan that matters is essentially the Pakistan army. And so for General Bajwa to make this effort, I think gives it far more credibility than for Prime Minister Imran Khan. And so it's actually a smart thing, for the Pakistani military to have done. It was the only thing that would actually stand some chance of success.
So would the Americans have nudged this along?
Not at all. Not at all.
Not at all?
Absolutely not. I mean, this was really an initiative that was owed entirely to the Pakistani military's calculations about what they needed for Pakistan's own self-interest.
When you say the Pakistanis or, the General Bajwa wanted to restore the equilibrium, what does that mean?
Well, the last few years have been very difficult for both countries. Pakistan faces a perpetual threat of being blacklisted, under the FATF. The Pakistani economy is not exactly in great shape, and COVID has only complicated things even further. The kind of support that they imagined the CPEC corridor providing in terms of an economic lift has not yet materialized. So Pakistan is in a very difficult state, and the last thing they need is essentially a very rambunctious India, that might make life even more difficult for them. So I understand their calculations in terms of trying to, put some sort of, bring some sort of order to what has been a very unruly bilateral relationship, especially in the last 2 years.
But it's been more than 12, 13 years since the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Now, Hafiz Saeed, the mastermind of those attacks, is in jail or house arrest or whatever it is for the time being. But surely it doesn't take 12 and a half years to charge a man and to, of such a big crime.
Well, it does if you are in Pakistan, because the Pakistanis view all these groups as important assets of the state. And they are not quite ready to get rid of them yet.
Not even
And
General Bajwa.
including General Bajwa. And that's why I said the jury is still out on what this initiative means. Is it meant to be just a tactical effort at temporizing? Or is this meant to be indicative of a strategic shift? And if it is to be the latter, then I think General Bajwa will have to do a lot more than simply reach out through a back channel. He'll have to make some very hard decisions with respect to the Pakistani state's relationship with all the jihadi groups it has spawned over the last 30 years. And I don't know whether they are quite there, just yet. So you keep your fingers crossed, you take it for what it's worth, you keep the lines of dialogue open, but don't uncork the champagne.
So, in your view, the Pakistani army should shut down these relationships with all these terror groups, whether it's the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Toiba or all the others that we hear about.
Absolutely, and they should do it in Pakistan's own self-interest. I mean, that's certainly going to be increasingly the precondition for a rapprochement with India. There's no question about that. And the Modi government has made it very clear that whether it talks or whether it doesn't talk, any fundamental rapprochement with India will require Pakistan to exit the terrorism business. That has been very clearly conveyed by the Modi government. So if the Pakistanis want to be, in a position where they enjoy the true fruits of peace, they're going to have to make these decisions. And my view is that they ought to make these decisions for their own sake, irrespective of the benefits for the relationship with India.
So a ceasefire agreement on the line of control is really testing the waters and to see how far the Pakistanis are willing to go and whether they're truly changing their colors on the terrorism front.
I think so, because remember how what caused the intensification of ceasefire violations in the last few years, right? It was the repeated terrorism attacks, which then moved the government of India to authorize the army to engage in very deliberate targeting of Pakistani military assets across the line of control, and that was done partly to convey India's disenchantment with all the nonsense that was occurring with terrorism. Now that course has run its, that strategy has run its course, and you have to look for some ways to get out of the cul-de-sac. And so I think this is a very good development.
So how do you look at the fact that the killers of Daniel Pearl are being freed from a jail in Karachi again, 17 or 18 years later?
I think it is an absolute outrage. And it's the single most important thing that has dismayed the Biden administration about Pakistan. If the Pakistanis were hoping that they could sort of start with a clean slate with the new administration in Washington, what their political system has done to Daniel Pearl's killers has been the single worst thing that they could have done.
But on the other hand, Mr. Tellis, the Americans are trying to exit from Afghanistan. You have conducted a policy review. Now, be that as it may, whether you stay back, you add troops. But the principal decision has been made, which is that you will leave, if not this year, then, in the near future. For that, you need Pakistan. You need to exit. You need a stable Afghanistan after you exit. So Pakistan, Pakistan controls the levers, yeah.
Of course, but that doesn't mean that one has to surrender, to Pakistan in order to make that happen. I mean,
but that's what you're doing. That's what Zalmay Khalilzad has done.
I am not sure. I mean, I think there has been a recognition that Pakistan's participation in this process will be critical for success, but that doesn't mean that you give away the store. And I think the Biden administration now is conducting its own review about what our Afghanistan policy, will look like. But no one's going to give in to Pakistani coercion of whatever kind simply because its cooperation is needed for stability in Afghanistan. I mean, remember, if Afghanistan fails, the price will be paid in highest form, of course, by the Afghan people themselves, but immediately thereafter by Pakistan next. So there are limits to Pakistan's ability to coerce the international community into getting the kind of deal it wants.
So when the Pakistanis keep saying that they can only have a full normalization with India once the Kashmir Article 370 is rolled back, I mean, that's not going to happen for sure in India because now the state has been integrated into the Indian Union, or it's a union territory right now. How does then Pakistan, I mean, how do you see that?
Well, I think it's a strange argument to make because it will only, first, as you point out, there is not a chance, of that aim being realized.
How in hell is that?
Because absolutely, India is not going to walk that back for its own reasons. So it's, to my mind, self-defeating for Pakistan to be sort of, screaming from the rooftops that that's the precondition for successful rapprochement. Because if you take that at face value, then there will never be successful rapprochement. I mean, the plain fact of the matter is this. Pakistan has to accept a very simple reality, that the state of Jammu and Kashmir, whatever its legal status might be, is for all intents and purposes Indian territory. It's never going to be Pakistani territory as Pakistan desires. And the faster Pakistan reconciles itself to that reality, the better off everyone will be.
Actually, what do you make of, with China being Pakistan's sort of patron state? How do you think China looks at this re-engagement? And I'm asking you in connection with the India-China disengagement. Can you sort of trilateralize this for us?
I don't think so, actually. And I think one shouldn't try to trilateralize it too much. I think the issues regarding, the territorial problems between China and India have a logic all their own, even though the provocations, in my view, were linked to larger Chinese concerns about India. But I wouldn't treat Pakistan as a simple cat's paw for China. And I don't think the Chinese will be in any hurry to, rush to Pakistan's defense in the event of troubles with India. I mean, one has to be very careful. There may be some circumstances under which a trilateralization may make sense, but it would be unwise to simply presume that is, a sort of perpetual reality.
So a couple of two last questions, actually. If you remember the nuclear tests in 1998, actually, and at the time also, then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee wrote to then US President Bill Clinton to say, and that a bitter neighbor in the north, meaning China, was one of the reasons, or perhaps the main reason why India went nuclear. We've come a really, really long way, haven't we?
Yes, we have. And I think, the Chinese, whether they acknowledge it or not, have begun to recognize that India is a nuclear state. That immediately puts a brake on the worst kind of aggression you can imagine the Chinese are capable of mounting. And India has, clearly demonstrated to the international community that it is a rising power of equal significance to China. And that simply happens to be, again, part of the new emerging architecture in Asia. The Chinese will have to learn to live with it, just as we recognized it very early on and responded to it.
But do you think the Chinese understand that?
Well, there will come a grudging acceptance, right? Because reality always has an uncomfortable way of making its presence known. So the old Chinese contempt of India will slowly have to give way to a recognition that India is not a pushover. And I think the way India conducted itself in this crisis should remind them, if nothing else, that India is not a pushover.
Now, 2 presidents ago, when Barack Obama, specifically when he visited India and, when he left his last event in Delhi and subsequently even in his book, he refers to Prime Minister Modi's and the BJP's treatment of India's minorities. There was some criticism, some indirect, some more direct. Do you think that, again, we've come a long way from there? And how do you look at Prime Minister Modi today, especially in terms of his dealing with the pandemic as well as on the India, China and Pakistan issue?
Well, I think on the pandemic, he has done quite impressively. whatever the difficulties may have been early on, I wouldn't be quick to point a finger because we have not done very well in the United States with respect to the pandemic. And so his own performance in comparison has been far more impressive. Uh, you know, especially when you look at the performance of the Trump administration in the early months. On China, I think he's held his ground despite an early reverse. And on Pakistan, he showed himself to be remarkably opportunistic, that when an opportunity opened itself for the ceasefire, he seized it without in any way prejudicing India's claims and India's preparedness. So if things go south, India will be ready to respond appropriately. But he has not given up the opportunities for maintaining some sort of normalcy, even with a difficult state like Pakistan. And that's to his credit.
And on the treatment of India's minorities, do you think, or is that now a question that is not as high on the agenda?
Well, I think it will always be on the agenda, but I think Prime Minister Modi himself recognizes that a disturbed domestic environment is not conducive for his own objectives, both politically and in terms of the way he is seen in the world. And so I expect that, he will take his bearings from exactly those considerations.
Ashley Tellis, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for speaking to The Print. And like I said earlier, you're considered to be our man in DC, India.
Oh, thank you, Jyoti. That'll get me into a lot of trouble, but thank you all the same.
No, thanks again.